All right, guys, so if you missed class when I went over kind of some tips and tricks on how to remember at least some of the states, this is just going to give kind of an overview of what we talked about. So, very first thing that you are going to do, I think, to help you remember, and some of these are stretches, but that's okay. It's going to help you remember, hopefully. But the first person you want to find, you just saw me draw him on the screen, is the chef Mimel. Some people call him an elf, but he kind of looks like a little man, and you might not see it right now, but give me a sec. So Minnesota is going to be Mimel's hat. Iowa is going to be his face, and that's easy to remember because every face has an eye, so that tells you that it's Iowa. And then Missouri is going to be his belly, and that'll be important in a minute. You got Arkansas, there's pants, and then Louisiana is super easy because it's in the shape of an L. So put all that together, you've got Mimel. Just keep saying it. Mimel, Mimel, Mimel. Okay, so this at least gives you the beginning letter to help you remember. And I think the I in Iowa is like the dead giveaway. And this definitely looks like a nose. So I think you can pull it together that that's a face. So now Minnesota and Missouri. That might be confusing. You might mix them up. Here's an easy way to remember. So Mimel, the chef, not a very good chef because he has a bellyache. And when you have a bellyache, you're in misery. And that's what this state is, Missouri. So he's in misery. And the reason is because of all the grease from all the KFC. Look at Kentucky Fried Chicken. Kind of literally is in the shape of a chicken wing. So Mimel has eaten way too much Kentucky Fried Chicken. One of my classes, this is a little bit of a stretch, but Tennessee, maybe he ate 10 Kentucky Fried Chicken wings, and that's why he's sick. But either way, he's in misery. He's got a bellyache because he ate too much fried chicken, KFC, from Kentucky Fried Chicken. Some people also say that Tennessee looks like the table that it's sitting on, so table, up to you. But when you have a bellyache, sometimes, you're going to throw up. And some people just call that getting ill. So we can say that Mimel got ill in Ohio. Should already know where Ohio is. We live here. But if you it's coming right out of his mouth. Illinois borders Iowa, which is Mimel's mouth. And when you throw up, that's where you throw up. So he gets ill in Ohio, all the way across I-70. So a little bit of a stretch, but you got Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. So ill in Ohio. And bam, you've already got however many states just from knowing where Mimel is and what he's all about. Now, when you also get sick, sometimes it doesn't come out this way, it comes out the other one. And when you used to go to the bathroom before we had cell phones, some people would take magazines with them. So because Mimel is sick, he's got to go to the bathroom. That's why some people also said that Tennessee was like the toilet. But either way, down here by his pants, you've got, he's reading a magazine. So we did before cell phones or like crossword magazine things, whatever. So you got mag. So you got Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. If you know geography, you know that this is the Mississippi River. So you might already know where Mississippi is and be able to identify it. But sometimes people get that, Mississippi and Alabama switched. So if you think that he's reading a magazine, MAG, you got Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. Most people know Florida. That's one of the 4 that everybody always knows, like your Florida, Texas, California, Ohio. Almost everybody comes in knowing those, although some people don't. But if you're a country music fan, you know the Florida-Georgia line. So if you know where Florida is, then you know that they share a long border. So that's Georgia. So just knowing Mimel and remembering this little story could help you get at least all of those states. Now let's move on to the Carolinas. So I think of the Carolinas as the 2 sisters on the East Coast. And if we have our compass rose, our never eat soggy worms or soggy waffles or whatever you use to remember your compass rose, the one that's going to be on top is going to be north, and the one that's going to be on bottom is going to be south. I look at it as South Carolina as like the little sister because it's smaller for South Carolina. Because what a lot of people will do is they'll say that where Virginia is North Carolina, and where North Carolina is South Carolina, but that's not the case. We think small. South Carolina is the small little sister to the big North Carolina. All right. Wish I had a good one for Virginia. I just don't, but this story might kind of help you. So, at least with West Virginia is a super odd shape. It just kind of looks like it's these random carvings out of practically nothing. Kentucky's kind of the same way, which is why we say it's like a chicken wing. So, West Virginia and Virginia actually all used to be one state. This was before the Civil War. So, they used to be all one state. And actually, during the Civil War, when Virginia was making the decision to break away from the United States and join South Carolina and the rest of the southern states for the Confederacy. The people living in West Virginia, we call it like Appalachia because this is where the Appalachian Mountain Range kind of goes. And they weren't really on board. So they were Virginians, but they didn't agree with breaking away from the United States and joining the Confederacy. One main reason is because in Appalachia, you don't have a lot of farming going on. If you've ever gone to Myrtle Beach, you know there's not a lot of farmland as you're going through West Virginia. So they didn't depend on slavery as much. Not that they didn't have slaves, but they didn't depend on slavery as much. So they didn't see as much of a reason to, break away from the United States. So they actually petitioned and broke away and created their own state, and they maintained the Virginia part, but now they're just West Virginia. And if we look at our compass rose, that makes sense because if you got Virginia here, then West Virginia is technically to the west of Virginia, right? So not a really great way to remember Virginia, except it is one of those larger states on the East Coast, and it's where Washington and Washington and Thomas Jefferson were from, and we know that they had these big plantations, a lot of farmland. It might help you. Okay, so then Maryland. Maryland is this very odd-shaped, I see an M, but that's just how I remember it. It's not a very pretty M, but I kind of still see it anyway. So that is going to be Maryland, or maybe like Maryland marries the Virginias together. I don't know. Sorry. I'm always trying to come up with new ones. But anyways, Maryland kind of looks like that M. And if we look at Maryland, Maryland ends with a D. And right here at the very tip of Maryland is Delaware. So Maryland ends with a D, and that's where Delaware begins. All right. So, and then the capital of Delaware is Dover. So that kind of also helps, but you don't have to know the capitals if you don't want to yet. All right. I think New Jersey kind of looks like a J. It's definitely a stretch, but maybe you'll see it. So that's how I remember New Jersey. New York kind of in the shape of a Y. A little bit of a stretch. A lot of people just know New York because it's New York. Big mistake people make is they want to label this area as a state. It is not. It is just a part of New York. Okay, so don't label that as a state. The small states that you guys are all worried about, I'm going to get to in just a minute. All right, I'm going to move here east a little bit from New York to Vermont. Vermont is in the shape of a V. They made it super easy for you. And then if you continue to trace the border of the next state, kind of looks like a backwards N, and that is New Hampshire. So Virginia is the one that looks like the V, and then its neighbor is going to be New Hampshire. And NH maybe reminds you of neighbor. Don't have a good one for Maine, except it's the easternmost state, so it's like the Maine state, like pointing the way. I don't know. It's Maine. Don't have a great one for it. And then now the ones that everybody has anxiety about. I'm never going to remember these little guys. So let's go back to our memory of the Pilgrims. Pilgrims end up in Massachusetts. That's where the Puritans will go to, which they're the ones you can blame for all these small states in the first place. They just all couldn't get along. They kept kicking each other out, making new states. So it's their fault. Anyways, so you got, let's say the Pilgrims, we know that they landed on Plymouth Rock, which isn't really true, but it made for a good story for your harvest party. And when I think of Plymouth Rock, you see the little hook at the end of Massachusetts. I think Plymouth Rock is right there. That's where they finally got to the land, and the Pilgrims, they land on Plymouth Rock. It's the one that's sticking out there. So if you remember, the Pilgrims landed in Massachusetts because they've got landed on Plymouth Rock, which is on that hook. It might help you remember Massachusetts at least. And then when we think of mass, we think of something like having weight and maybe squishing those two little states. And one of those little states is our smallest state, Rhode Island. Islands are typically small. So that real small state that Massachusetts is squishing is Rhode Island. And then Connecticut is going to connect New York to Rhode Island. I know, it's a stretch, but hey, it's something. Most people know Florida. If you don't, kind of looks like a finger. Kind of looks like it's like pointing down at Mexico or South America. All right, so, forgot about that state up north. Michigan. In the shape of a mitten. Michigan mitten. A lot of people will get Michigan and Wisconsin mixed up. Well, you should know, like, since Michigan and Ohio State are huge rivals, they do border each other. But if you can't remember that, if you flip over an M, it's a W. And then so from Minnesota, you flip it to Wisconsin, flip it back to Michigan. So MWM, flip back and forth. I know, a little bit of a stretch. Also don't have a great one for Pennsylvania, except if you're a football fan, you know that the Pittsburgh Steelers are from Pennsylvania, and they are in the AFC North, just like the Browns and the Bengals. And the reason why all those are such big rivalries is because they're right from that same area. So that might help you with Pennsylvania. All right, now let's move west. The Four Corners. This is the only place where we see a perfect intersection of 4 states, just like a cross, okay? And you could actually stand somewhere and be in 4 states at one time. So if you can find the cross over there, it's the only perfect cross. You can check me, and there's other places where it's a little offset. But here we got the perfect cross. So you can remember the 4 corners. You can. So Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. People usually will get Utah and California pretty well, but it is the New Mexico and Arizona that we mix up, because really when you look at what state borders more of Mexico, it's Arizona. And so some people will think that, well, sure, that's where New Mexico would be, but that's not the case. New Mexico is going to be closer to Texas, whereas Arizona is that one that's kind of breaking up California and New Mexico. And if you want another way to remember that, it's like you can't. Because most of us know Texas, so Texas starts with that T. All right, now moving over, most people know California. That's one of the 4 that everybody seems to come in knowing. So you got California, obviously starts with a C. And if you work your way up north, spells cow. So Oregon and Washington. If you watch Anchorman, you might remember the saying, how now, brown cow? I think 5th period came up with this one. But if you moved over to Nevada, ooh, that's a really bad N. So now. So you got now. CN, I don't know, Cartoon Network. I always think of California people as being rich. Las Vegas is in Nevada, so everybody from California goes over to Las Vegas, spends all their money, then comes back. It's not really accurate, but it's how I can imagine it. All right, let's move over to Montana. If you trace this edge of Montana, kind of looks like a man's face. I mean, it's be a woman's face, but for the purposes of remembering, if you remember Mantana, that might help you. If you accidentally make an A instead of Montana on the test, remember it's not a spelling test, so you'll be okay. So Montana, since it looks like a man, and I think of potatoes from Idaho potatoes. I don't even know why I think that, but I think of this man eating Idaho potatoes, and that's how I remember the Idaho. I don't know. That's not really a good one. Don't have a great Wyoming one either, except if we kind of go back to that flipping our M's. Montana, and you flip the M for Wyoming. Yeah, that's not a good one either, but hey, we go with it. All right, then next to Montana, and right before you get to Mimel, you have the Dakota Twins. They're twins. They look a lot alike. I think when you think of, most people think of Dakota, they think of somewhere cold. So it's going to be, more north or, closer to Canada. So you've got the Dakota twins here. And if we have our compass rose, we know that North Dakota is going to be the one on top and South Dakota is going to be the one on the bottom. Then we've got, I don't really have a good reason for this one, but I always think of Texas as, I think I just had an obnoxious friend that was a Texas fan, and I think that everybody from Texas thinks that they're better than everybody, which is not true, but it works out that way in my head. And a KO is a knockout. So if you think Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, you want to knock out Texas, because I always wanted to knock out my friend that would always talk about Texas. So that is maybe definitely a stretch. Or backward, it's talk, like TikTok. I don't know. Again, a stretch. Don't have a good one for Nebraska. Just kind of got to remember that it's there. Really, you just kind of have to remember where all of them are. But hopefully some of these little tips will help you. And then always don't forget about Alaska. It's always off to the side, and it will be on your map. But that's because it's not really connected to like the continental 48 United States. Hawaii is the same way. But Hawaii has a bunch of islands, and Hawaii ends with those I's, so that might help you there. And then Alaska, I think most of us kind of get Alaska too. It's cold up there. It's way more north than any of our states. So I don't know. I know some of them are stretches, and I know that a lot of it doesn't make sense, but that's really how our memory connects, is if we come up with stories. So hopefully that will help you guys.